It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogsty Network, the show where we talk about the dollars and the cents of the sports media industrial business complex. It's that nondescript business park at the edge of town. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing all right, man. It's got to have you back. It's a weird confluence of a low point in the sports business calendar, but with this massive controversy out there, and that's always fun to talk about. So things are going well. I'm glad to see my Dodgers, are hanging in there in the playoffs. We're recording this on Saturday morning, so by the time you hear this, my Dodgers will have taken 2 in a row to send the Atlanta Braves properly home and to face the cheating, awful, disgusting Houston Astros. So, all is good in my sports world right now. I mean, the Washington Redskins or Washington is what it is, and we all know that. So that doesn't even affect me anymore, to be honest. So I'm just more excited about my Dodgers.
Yeah, this is status quo October feelings if you're a Washington football team fan.
Oh, yeah, I know. I mean, Alex and I have always said on the Hogsty, we could probably just replay some shows and, it's the same exact problems, the same exact, comments week after week after week. And, nobody'd probably notice. Just like sub in, I could just edit in the new team, and save us all an hour of recording time.
Yeah, the way you'd know, right, is that if you were paying attention, you could track quarterback changes. There's those fossil animals that they do, geological timing with, and when they lived and when they died. That's like you could do the same thing. It's like carbon dating with Redskins quarterbacks to know how far back in the
I
times
know.
go.
Yeah, I mean, God help them if they actually have a quarterback for a whole year. We did a little segment on this a while ago where we talked about it. If you really think about it, since the 91 Super Bowl year, they've had Jason Campbell for, 3 or 4 years, and then Kirk Cousins for maybe 3. Beyond that, there's been no stability at all in Washington's quarterback history other than those 2 periods. It's the most just crazy, hopeless, list of players you've ever seen. Even the Cleveland Browns probably can't match us. Maybe they can, but
they had a stat that it was 30 that Case Keenum, which when I was watching Thursday Night Football, I was like, oh yeah, Case Keenum played for Washington
for 5 minutes. Yeah,
yeah. They said that they had 30. He was the 32nd starting quarterback. I can't remember when they started that, but that's a good chunk as well.
Holy moly! Yeah, no, I missed the Thursday Night Football because my Dodgers were playing, but that's God Almighty. Anyway, it's not the Washington Redskins hour. I just think it's really funny. I mean, at this point, you got to laugh at how many quarterbacks this team has had. And, they're going to have, they're going to probably go back to Ryan Fitzpatrick and who knows, Kyle Allen may get a shot, this year. So it's like, just never.
Yeah, let them all play. What's the difference? All right. So we are going to move on to the main focus of the show. So this was a good one. If you're into, true crime podcasts or true crime documentaries, this is one to get the blackboard or the punch board out, get your pictures, get your string. There's going to be lots of cross referencing, lots of side stories, lots of red herrings here for sure, because this is quite the cat's cradle of a story, and because we're a Washington football team based show, maybe, but really because all things NFL scandal seem to begin and run through, driven by, and involve one Washington football team owner, Dan Snyder. Ooh, did I do it? Did I stick the landing there?
That's a first. It's a first for everything. Chris got the man's name right. It's a miracle.
So if you're putting stuff up on your big board, you'd put his picture right sort of there in the middle, right? We might call him
it's like the 7
hub.
degrees of Kevin Bacon,
Yeah, exactly. Only you need 2. 2 degrees. So Steve, why don't you tell us about, just briefly, and we've talked about this many times, the two sort of big legal scandals that seem to be the engine for where the NFL finds itself right now.
Yeah, and by the way, we obviously talked about the John Gruden aspect of this on the last show with Alex, and that's a part of it.
He's a big player now.
Yeah, right. It's just an interesting side note at this point. So, where we're going, where we've been here with these scandals. So, number one, as everybody remembers, Washington was accused by a bunch of former cheerleaders and at least one reporter of sexual misconduct in the workplace with coaches, with team executives. So that was one thing. The cheerleader component had multiple layers to it. They were accused of making an illicit video of cheerleaders in various stages of undress without their consent. There was the story about Dan Snyder, or the allegation of Dan Snyder kind of pimping out a cheerleader to one of his buddies at a charity event. So there's the part one is the sexual misconduct part, which has multiple layers. Part two of this story begins with the fight between Dan Snyder and his now former business partners, the minority shareholders, Dwight Schrute, Howard Rothman, and Fred Smith of FedEx. And they were super mad at him because, in their view, he didn't properly pay out distributions that were supposed to be paid pursuant to the corporate governance documents. And so, while all that happened, a story got printed by a company or a website rather, called Meow, MEAW, which is based out of India. And that story alleged that Dan Snyder was involved with Jeffrey Epstein. And Snyder took exception to that and filed a lawsuit in India against this Indian website. But it became immediately apparent that he believed Dwight Schrute was behind the story. And then later, he obviously believed Bruce Allen was behind the story. So what Snyder has done is filed a whole bunch of discovery lawsuits all around the country that are all linked to the main Indian lawsuit. So what does this have to do with what's going on now? Well, in conjunction, and to back up about the sexual harassment story, recall that when that broke, Dan Snyder hired a lawyer named Beth Wilkinson out of D.C., who's a longtime NFL lawyer, and he basically said, "You can come investigate you can come investigate me, but you work for me, remember? But investigate me, and I'm sure it'll turn out well." And we all we meaning the fan base and others, rightly said, "You can't ask your own lawyer to investigate you. That's crazy." And the NFL finally realized this, and so then they hired Wilkinson. Well, as it turns out, all she did was give an oral report to the NFL, probably they had 5 minutes before Roger Goodell had to hit the golf course. And then it was okay and all was well. Well, as a part of that, Washington, as it turns out, produced 650,000 emails off their server. This is where the John Gruden stuff came in. So then people rightfully wondered if, hey, if there's 650,000 emails, why did you give Beth Wilkinson 5 minutes and just sort of make her go away? Well, the answer is obvious. They don't really care about the answer. They want the scandal to go away, right? That's obvious. So, but now there's a huge cry, rightfully so, for those emails to be produced. And before I kick it over to Chris for his thoughts, the final piece to this is now, unbelievably, Congress has got involved. And I have strong feelings about this, and I'll get to, but to reiterate the facts here, Carolyn B. Maloney, who is a Democrat from New York, and I'm going to get this name totally wrong, so forgive me, but Raja Krishnamurthy, I think, something along those lines, who's a Democrat from Illinois. Maloney is the chairwoman of the Committee on Oversight and Reform, and the other one, Raja, is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy. They sent a letter to the NFL saying, you guys need to produce all these emails because we're greatly concerned about what's happened in Washington and its allegations of women being mistreated, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that has happened. I have a whole lot of thoughts on this, but I've talked long enough. That's a summary. Chris, your thoughts?
I have lots of thoughts as well. We could probably do an entire show on any one of the 7 to 9 strands of this, or at least a solid segment, and we'll probably touch on many of it. One, I just want to connect it to themes that we talk about and even stories that we talked about on the show, if you're a longtime listener, or just to sort of catch you up a little bit. Anytime we've talked about any of the versions of the stories that Steve's talked about, we've talked about a few things. One, we've talked about how Snyder's inability to take a victory and to continue to be litigious and fight has opens himself up and those he associates with, which by the way includes the National Football League, to immense amount of risk. So we're seeing what that means right now. You know, when you're seeing a drip of daily stories that seem pretty big and that go from the federal government to shady real estate secretaries somewhere in Montgomery County, you know, like you see the open wound of risk that everyone involved here has now opened themselves up to. And so both ones that came against him and then ones that he's then pursued is just creating this chasm of data, basically, that's now starting to be available and sifted through. And second big theme for us, Steve, has been if we could only see this data, these communications. We talked about it with the Bruce Allen and Dwight Scharr, and imagine if we saw the whatever it was. We've now learned in two different ways that Bruce Allen's thumb is sore. This dude texts and emails a lot.
Prodigious rate.
Yeah. So we would have, if we could only see those text messages. We said, if we could only see the NFL's communication and look in their books. We've been saying, what kind of things could be discovered? Well, guess what? A lot of stuff is getting opened up. A lot of stuff is opening. A lot of stuff from the law, the government, court cases are going to force things, or at least force the discussion about whether things should be opened up. So, if you are interested in seeing behind the curtain, you may not get a better opportunity to see behind the curtain for some of this stuff here than we've been presented right now. So I find it remarkable just where we are on those two fronts.
If any of you all understand the physics and science behind modern hydrogen nuclear weapons, basically there's a small, tiny nuclear reaction that causes the bigger nuclear reaction in a bomb. And hope to God none of this ever happens. But the point is, the trigger is a tiny bomb along the technological line of what the United States dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. And that triggers the big bomb. So what's happened here is kind of similar, okay? Dan Snyder started a tiny trigger by filing this Indian lawsuit. And that has turned into a gigantic mess. I would question, he can't get out of his own way. Why are you still pursuing an Indian lawsuit? There's no evidence that Snyder was involved in Jeffrey Epstein at all. Are you going to take the Meow website? I mean, why are you filing a lawsuit in India about this? Just let it go. If you had let it go, as Chris said, a lot of this stuff wouldn't happen here, okay? So now we're stuck in a position where he's filed some of these emails, Snyder, in some of these discovery lawsuits around the country. Filed them in Los Angeles. Federal court, talking about here. And because of that, it's given more cause for the release of all these emails. If he just let it go, dropped the lawsuit a long time ago. He should have dropped the lawsuit when he settled with his minority business partners. If he'd done that, none of this stuff might have happened. Now, I think the idea that Congress is involved in this is utterly absurd. This is not a congressional issue. The goings of one particular private business is not Congress's concern at all. I unfortunately had to take over for Twitter for Alex for a day because Alex is out of town. And somebody wrote in and said, it is Congress's business because football has an antitrust exemption. Listen to me. Football does not have an antitrust exemption. That's baseball, okay? So it's really none of Congress's business. And clearly these two congressmen or Congress people are just grandstanding for attention. It's crazy that Congress is involved. But what is the NFL supposed? Here's my question, really. What is the NFL going to do now? Can they just bury their head in the sand and hope people forget about this for long enough that they don't have to release these emails? Because believe me, I have two things are self-evident about these emails. One, John Gruden is not nearly the only one who said bad things in 650,000 NFL emails. Number one, it's not just John Gruden, okay? And number two, the NFL will be embarrassed by the NFL's own communications.
At best.
Yeah, and I'm not even talking about racial stuff or whatever. I mean, because Gruden obviously was terrible, and he's just he's just a big dummy. But the NFL will hate all this too, and won't just be Washington. So, if there was a Fawn Hall of today, they would gladly hire her to shred all these emails and go, whoops, they're gone. Because the NFL does not want any of this to come out. So what's their way out of this? Their way out of it may just be to try to hang on until the next shiny toy comes up and people forget about it.
Which, luckily for them, which is also sort of part of the narrative, is just happens to be the next game that's on TV. Because the quality of the football this season, or at least the excitement of the games, has been off the hook. I mean, it's like huge game. There's like 3 huge, awesome games. I mean, how many overtime? I mean, so their shiny toy might just be the play on the field. And I think that's what they're doing. They're burying their head in the sand, and they're saying that, let football be football, and it'll drive us through. I think that's sort of why they're here to begin with, right? So, I mean, can we just take a step back for a second and think, if you're the other owners, you're Roger Goodell, I mean, the fact that they are having to take bullets for Daniel Snyder and protect him to this degree, and they are protecting him. When they sided with him on the minority ownership, and they extended the loan, all stuff we talked about, and they lent him the money, all the gymnastics that they went through to bring to resolution the minority ownership battle and make Tanya and Dan the sole owners of Washington football team. They picked a side, so they've already circled the wagons, and I'm sure they did it holding their nose, with clothespins. But can you imagine the discussions that are going on in the NFL office? Because for all the things, Steve, that you just said, they're scared. There's a lot of danger involved here. And they're to take a bullet for Daniel Snyder, who's, oh, by the way, destroying a fundamental franchise in their league in one of the most powerful cities in the face of the earth. So he's already doing enough damage just as being a bad owner. To now that they're all taking bullets for him, and he may take them all out.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget, for those of you who aren't Washington fans, this franchise has been around since 1932. It's one of the oldest franchises in the league. It was one of the all-time greats. They're the Joe Gibbs teams in the 80s and early 90s, all of that. But listen, Dan Snyder is not the only idiot in the league. There's a bunch of other stupid owners. Mike Brown, Cincinnati, terrible. There's Jerry Richardson, who did get run out, but only because there was direct evidence of him playing grab ass, which thus far has not happened. And there's many others that have done crazy, ridiculous things, and others that are terrible owners. The Ford family is terrible, but they can't run the Ford family out of the NFL for being terrible. So I'm sure that, Dan Snyder's kind of the ugly kid in the corner, in the NFL room, right? And the in crowd is definitely Bob Kraft and Jerry Jones and, a handful of others.
Yeah, but Mike Brown doesn't put the other 31 owners in constant legal and PR jeopardy on a weekly
you're
basis.
right. He's just a bad owner.
Yeah.
And up until now, Dan Snyder's just been a bad owner.
He's just been a bad owner.
Yeah, he's only embarrassed the Redskins franchise and now the Washington franchise. But now he's embarrassing everybody because, like you said, like I said, I can promise you that in 650,000 emails, there's stuff that buy-in from the league and others that's embarrassing, that doesn't need to be, they don't want to get out. Because, I think I know from doing Hogslide long enough that these coaches John Gruden isn't nearly the only one who has bad thoughts in his head. A lot of them are a bunch of meatheads. It's a hard drinking, hard partying culture, and they all say awful things. Not all of them. That's not fair. A lot of them say awful things and believe awful things. So all that's going to come out, and so I think maybe what they need to get past is Congress, because I would venture a guess, because I have nothing but contempt for Congress in all phases, first of all, so it's hard for me to be objective about anything they do. But the history of Congress and sports is they have one hearing, so the congressman on the committee can get some PR points, and then they move on. And the same thing is true for other things. Like if you recall, Ted Cruz had a hearing where he was yelling at the CEO of Facebook and Google and all that about political censoring and stuff, and he had one hearing and he moved on. He made his point. So my guess is that these two congressmen, Maloney and whatever the other guy, Raja something, they're going to probably have their one hearing and move on. So I think the NFL strategy here probably is to hope and pray the games are continue to be good, so the public will be happy with the product. They get past one hearing, and they can bob and weave enough to where not much comes out, and then the public will forget about it. I think that's probably their strategy here. They definitely don't want to just release 650,000 emails into the stratosphere and hope for the best. Like 52 card pickup. Here go.
Yeah, and they've already, I think, politely declined. They said we'd be happy to talk, but we're handing over nothing. So they've already sort of made that formal declaration. And I totally agree that this is probably just a good moment for PR, or you get your name in the paper as.
It's really not Congress's. It's not Congress's affair. The inner workings of one business is crazy.
I think what it is. So I think that's a sort of a minor threat in these threat family, but what I think it shows the NFL is just a narrative jump, right? Like, even if the most cynical read is you have some congresswomen jumping on a popular issue that makes them look good, and they've got the real estate with a couple-hour committee hearing to make a splash. Even at that most cynical read, which is probably a lot of truth, that's still bad for the NFL. You still don't want you don't want to put your business, you don't want to be the story to that degree that others can get notoriety off of dunking on you, right? So
I agree. That's why I'm saying they probably just want to get past that and get it over with, and then hopefully everybody will forget about it, move on to the next disaster.
Yeah, but it definitely is a sign that the heat is going up on the boiler, right? Like, you could just see this thing taking off. It is so. If I was creating a betting odds on who loses their job next, and there will be more losings of jobs, Washington fans, none of which will involve Dan Snyder losing his team, unfortunately. I mean, this guy would have to, be strangling children in the street at this point, I think. But but I'd put Roger Goodell, on in my top 3 odds leaders on who's going to lose their job over this, because one, there's got to be stuff in those emails, and I'm not, don't take me wrong, it might be, but I'm not saying it's the racial, all that stuff. I'm saying look at the emails between Bruce Allen and Pash, the lawyer. There's a lot
Jeff Pash is one in the general counsel's office in D.C., and what Chris is talking about is now we know that Pash and Allen were best buddies, and they went back and forth. Pash buried some investigations for him and made some fines go away, and clearly that there was an improper relationship between the two.
I think sometimes in these stories we get so lost on, John Gruden said horrible things, and there's naked cheerleader pics bouncing around the internet. All bad. I'm not making a value judgment on that.
It's not the big picture question, though.
But a league executive, a lawyer, and a team executive back channel negotiating about how the league should be run, that's some fundamental stuff right there.
As an example, what came out in this one story is that Washington was fined $15,000, which is like a pack of gum for an NFL team, by the way.
For a player.
Basically falsifying and misreporting injuries. Now, Washington could have just paid that. Nobody even knew that happened. That wasn't even public knowledge. Instead, Bruce reaches out to his buddy Jeff Pash, who says, "Don't worry about it. I'll make it go away." Well, that's affecting league discipline. That emboldens Washington to do it again. Yeah. If they know they can get away with it. I don't know if anybody's going to lose their job, though, Chris. I think what they may do is try to turn Bruce Allen into the bat. He's already gone. And Dan Snyder hates him now, obviously. So everybody may point to Bruce Allen and say he's the bad guy here, and this is why he's out in California on a beach now. And so blame him. Unless something – and now recall – Chick Hernandez reported, I don't know, back in maybe 2014 or 13 or 14, that Dan Snyder never uses email. Right. And so if that is true, and I don't have a reason to doubt at least what Chick says was told to him, if that is true, then there's probably not anything from Dan in here, which means he's going to get away scot-free, because I think the only way major things happen to Dan is that if something direct comes out about him. Now, what can the NFL do? First of all, the rumor that went around this week that Roger Goodell is, calling for a vote about Dan Snyder, that's totally ridiculous, okay? Roger Goodell works for the owners. Roger Goodell does not get rid of the owners. There is something in the NFL Constitution that says that they can force an owner to sell, but that is not a Roger Goodell thing. That is going to take a group of influential owners, again, Bob Kraft, Jerry Jones, and several others to start that. Roger Goodell is just an employee. So I'm not sure Goodell is going to lose his job, though, because I think that the scapegoat is already dead. They already shot the cat.
I totally agree that I think there's almost a coordinated effort amongst parties to make Bruce Allen the fall guy.
He's already gone, so might as well blame it all on him.
Yeah, I totally agree that Goodell would not lose his job right with anything we know right now. But we also know that somebody, let me restate that. Probably a multitude of people have access to all or parts of these emails, and we don't even know what other data sets are out there. The emails are ones that we know about that exist. More is going to come out. And we've got, the leaks right now are, it's a faucet. So, and who's doing that? And I don't think they're actually necessarily the same people. And multiple people have access to these emails, or some of them at least. So, that's the betting odds more is on if and when more comes out. I think there could be lots of stuff in there that's going to reflect Goodall on bad light.
It's interesting you say that about the emails. And when we talked about this 2 weeks ago and you were out, Alex's Oliver Stone conspiracy theory about the Gruden emails was that DeMaurice Smith did it. Because the Gruden emails came out on the same day that Smith had a vote, and the story in the news was that he was either shy a vote or two or barely going to make it. And so Alex's thought, again, without that, he's just hypothesizing. Alex's thought was he throws some emails like that out there that, John Gruden's saying awful things about D. Smith, and that might get him a vote or two. Interesting thought. I can't disagree that it makes some sense. But as to all this other stuff, who's leaking it all? Snyder filed some of this stuff, redacted versions of some of these emails in one of these discovery lawsuits in California. Who has access to all these emails? Obviously, everybody. Some people in Washington, in Washington's facility in Ashburn. The NFL, lots of people in the NFL have them. So it could be anybody, and it could be a coordinated, because a lot of these leaks that come out in politics and stuff are planned and coordinated and done for a reason and approved. Leaks. That could be what's happening here, again, to sort of get ahead of the story and bury Bruce Allen. Because this Bruce Allen, Jeff Pash stuff, Pash is another one. They may be making him a scapegoat, too, because it makes him look bad. And so maybe the leaks are a way to get ahead of the story and blame these two guys and hope everybody takes it. The one thing that could happen, I think, is if Congress gets too far, I don't think they will, but if they subpoena these emails, then the NFL can't refuse. If they just get a letter from two random congressmen in some committee nobody's heard of, they could probably dodge that. But if there's a subpoena, And God help us if Congress is subpoenaing 650,000 emails that has nothing to do with the economy or national security or anything important. God help us. But if they do that, that's another story because then they can't dodge it. But I don't think it's going to happen. So there's a variety of suspects, but I think it all is an attempt to get ahead of the story and blame, shoot these two guys to avoid us getting shot.
I think that's definitely a probability, or at least it's someone. And I actually don't. I'm beginning to think less and less that it's one source for all these leaks.
Yeah, I think it's multiple.
Yeah,
it has to be.
Yeah, there's just too many conflicting interests about what's leaked, what impact it's going to have. There could be some coordination, but I don't think that it's just one source.
Well, think about it like this. I mean, you're right, because number one, we know Snyder filed some of them in a court of law. Somebody hates John Gruden. Or maybe somebody's trying to support D. Smith. That's Dan Snyder. That's maybe two other people. And then this Jeff Pash, Bruce Allen thing has nothing to do with John Gruden or DeMaurice Smith. So right there, that's two separate groups of people, or persons or groups of people who are doing it. Unless there's like a deep throat, if you go back to the Richard Nixon Watergate stuff, Deep Throat was the source for Bob Woodward, and it turned out to be there was one Deep Throat. But that's very rare. So the odds are, it appears as though we've had at least two separate leakers already, maybe more.
Yeah, and I mean, so if you start to put your candidate list up, it is not beyond the pale that Snyder Camp is doing it. There are parts of it are a leak. They certainly have the source. It could be more of a traditional whistleblower type of situation within the NFL. Somebody who's unhappy with maybe how the league swept the sexual investigation under the rug or saw stuff that's in these emails. So it could be an individual actor, which in a typical whistleblower situation, somebody who's in mid chain sees something they don't like and exercises their power and goes. It could be some of that. It could be. A lot of people thought it was the NFL themselves, especially with the second cache of Gruden emails to force Mark Davis, to fire him. So, I mean, all of these, I think you got the NFL, you got Snyder, you have an independent actor, you've got, DeMaurice Smith himself. You probably have like pretty good case for 7 or 9 different potential leakers.
Yeah, I mean, and Mark Davis isn't exactly in the in crowd himself, by the way. I don't think he's well beloved in NFL circles either. Certainly his dad wasn't, and Mark Davis is the dumber, younger version of Al Davis. So, I tend to, hell, it could be the IT guy in the computer office just entertaining himself for all we know.
Yeah, right.
But I do, I mean, it could be. But I think what this tells us, the odds are there's not one Deep Throat, right? The odds are that in this situation. So I think what we're going to see is more a trickle down of more and more and more until we get to the congressional hearing, and then the NFL is going to do everything they can to just bury it after that happens. Or if there's a hearing, and if there is a hearing.
And if it's not a hearing, there's probably more viable risks along subpoena power and getting to some of this stuff through the lawsuits. That's what I'm saying.
The subpoena is what scares you most.
Yeah, but like the lawyers for the women in the Washington suit probably have a better legal path to a subpoena than Congress.
Oh, for sure. They don't need Congress. I mean, you file a lawsuit that survives a summary judgment, and then start filing discovery subpoenas, and then certainly the NFL would fight them, but some of them they're not going to win it on at all. And listen, I mean, the women are forgotten in this, but they have a valid complaint here. They allege a series of inappropriate sexual misconduct actions, which by all accounts appear to be at least somewhat true. What happened? Absolutely nothing.
I mean, think about this, and this is where I do like, how is he not gone, and how does the NFL? And I know how I can understand. There go the grace by God go I can get the NFL circling the wagons around an owner. I understand all those things, but if there's sometimes where you just step back. Okay, so we're talking about the owner and leader of an organization who under his leadership, saw systemic exploitation of female workers, pimping out at the photo shoots, the secret naked pics, all of that stuff, right? All that stuff that we know. This is documented. This is not conjecture.
The Washington Post has the videos.
Yeah, that happened, in a company at scale. This was not this is not a he said, she said between an exec and a secretary, right? It's a much different thing. Now those images and the sort of digital assets of that exploitation of workers within a company are bouncing around the internet through a conduit of which is one of the most powerful companies in America, if not the world, the National Football League. And we still got to think, I wonder if they ever get Snyder on anything.
You want to know why? You want to know why? I know why. This is not the only team this stuff goes on.
Yeah, I know that, but...
You know that, and I know you know that, but I don't know if the people out there fully understand this. Like I said before, John Gruden is not the only coach who says dumb things. Okay? You understand, I've interviewed enough of these people now to know that the NFL culture is misogynistic. They're not that bright. It's a hard partying, hard drinking, womanizing culture. Not to say everybody does it, but I'm saying that's the culture of it. And so is John Gruden the only one that feels like this? No. Is Washington the only team in which reporter or team execs are hitting on cheerleaders? No, absolutely not. Look, like if you go back at Kobe Bryant, God rest his soul, rest in peace to Kobe. A couple years before he retired, a rumor came out that he was messing with the cheerleader. And what happened? The cheerleader got gone fast. They canned her immediately. And that's just one example. And that's the NBA. But point is, this has happened in other teams. What the NFL doesn't want is for this to come out and other people start reporting these things in other teams. Then they have a much bigger... Because right now they can just go, look, Dan Snyder's a dummy and he's a fool and blame him. And he changed... we put him in the corner sent him home to his room without dinner, and so we did, because that's... you give him a $10 million fine and tell his wife to be the public face. That's what it is. You sent him to his room without dinner, okay? So they're hoping that's enough. And hoping that more of this stuff doesn't come out. That's the real goal here, is to make... We don't want 32 stories like this to come out. That's the real goal of this.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. It just still amazes me that you have this much evidence of bad conduct, and it's not...
Well, I don't like him, because another story... Did you see this story, Chris? This week, we know that ESPN published 2 weeks ago, well, maybe last week, the attendance in the NFL.
Oh, yeah.
And Washington was last, right? Well, the story I just saw... I don't know, Wednesday or Thursday, was that the NFL had a conference call.
Oh, yeah.
Where they pointedly criticized the bottom 5 franchises, and Washington was one of it. It was like, I'm going to get the others wrong. It's like Detroit and a couple others. But
Jacksonville,
they made a point.
Detroit, and Cincinnati.
Yeah, there you go. And there might have been one. I think there were 5. There might have been one there. But regardless, the NFL criticized those franchises in front of all the other owners. To say you guys are hurting, the way you are managing your team is hurting NFL revenue because nobody's going to your games. So they're not happy with Washington. I just think that it hasn't risen nearly high enough to where the NFL wants to get rid of him because, again, yeah, he's worse, but a lot of these problems are going on in other teams too. Remember, don't forget, who was the Browns, the owner of the Cleveland Browns almost got indicted.
Yeah.
By the federal government for fraud and embezzlement and stuff in conjunction with he owns a Flying J truck stops, and the buck stopped like a level or two below him, but it almost got to him, So, there's other things that go on. The NFL just wants to bury it more than they want to punish Snyder. So if they're going to let Snyder hang himself in terms of him being a bad owner, as long as it doesn't spread to anyone else.
Yeah. To back up Steve's point about why we don't see more action against him, they hate Snyder. They want him gone. They would love for him not to be the owner of the Washington football team. They're average Joe WFT fan in terms of that. But but because Steve is right, because they know it's dominoes, because the easiest way to protect themselves is to protect this idiot. Um, Even though they would love to push him out, and if they ever got him on anything that they could, kind of sequester it, they'd do it, right? If they got something that wouldn't blow back on them, they'd pull the chain in a heartbeat. It almost makes me wonder strategically why the NFL didn't make a better dog and pony show over the Beth Wilkinson investigation. Like
They don't want it to come out that the other teams are doing
yeah,
it.
but they
That's
could.
why.
I'm just saying you could have done the stagecraft. The optics could have been a little bit better. Hey, a shitty written report, right? We don't need just an oral report. That's a tough look. They could have done. They could have made the fines. They could have just had him really be suspended for a year. There's other things they could have done to make it look like they tried a little harder.
Yeah, the oral report thing made it look really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, on the Hogsty, Jamal made a great joke about the golf course,
Yeah.
about it, because it truly did look like they gave this woman 5 minutes, and we got to go. So just speak your mind. Oh, great, it was bad, tough.
And we talked about this.
Thank you. Get out.
We talked about this before, but she was a company lawyer already. She helped him
Yes.
so she was not a hostile lawyer to begin with. Now let's quickly talk about this is a backdrop. The NFL is having the kind of dream year that they could have, in the offseason board meetings, they could have only hoped would materialize. Fans are back, numbers are up. Ad revenue is skyrocketing. We've talked about this before, but new ad buy powerhouses from gambling and to a lesser extent, alternative finance and crypto. The NFL is new TV contracts with more on the horizon. They are doing amazing. And so this is like the bright, sunny day at the beach, but just on the horizon, where everything else is light blue, there is a dark gray cloud that just seems to be getting a little bit bigger and a little bit closer. So what degree do you think this sort of like, dichotomy of everything's sunny except this is freaking out the league office?
Well, yeah, they don't want anything to derail the train, right? Because, like you said, I mean, if the ratings for that opening day game between Dallas and Tampa was the highest rated game they've had in a long time. Revenues up, ratings are up. Everything is excited. Aside from the bottom few franchises, the drags like Washington, with the ticket sales and everything, it's doing gangbusters. Do they want? They even buried the Deshaun Watson scandal, for Christ's sake. And that's a horrible, talk about misbehavior. It's a terrible scandal. 23 different women accused him of sexual misconduct. The NFL didn't blink about it. And I have some theories. I think the NFL is scared of suspending a black quarterback post Colin Kaepernick. That's just me being Oliver Stone about it. But I think that's part of it. But big picture wise, they do not want that to derail the train. So I do think there's some of that with this Washington, email scandal and all that. Look over here. Don't, it's kind of holding up the shiny toy for the puppy when you're trying to, distract him. That's what's going on here, because yes, you're right. Ratings are up, revenue's up. The TV contracts are enormous. Enormous. And they don't want it to mess it all up. So I think you're absolutely right. Yes, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and you're sort of, which I do think is their strategy. I think your analysis of the strategy is correct, and we'll see if it works. I think maybe if nothing else, which I think is highly improbable, but if nothing else comes out, it would work. They're just gonna hold their breath and just kind of try to get past it and see if they can just weather the storm. And like I said a few minutes ago, if you get Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Aaron Rodgers, and then pick pick Patrick Mahomes, whatever, add your quarterbacks in the next week doing superstar things in the last 3 minutes of a primetime game, maybe none of it matters.
That needs to be the story.
Yeah.
Make that the story. And people forget about, like I said, really here, the NFL just needs to get past this congressional stuff. They can ignore all the noise. They can have little shows like ours talk about this for a while, and some national reporters will write some stories, and then they're hoping it'll just go away. They need to get past the hearing, and after they do that, and assuming that goes, they get blasted for an hour or two by some grandstanding congressman, and then people forget about it, and then that'll be that. Because again, I think you're right. They don't want to derail the train, right? They continue to do better than any other league. There was a story, we were perusing in preparing for the show. The NBA is projecting revenue of $10 billion for 2021-2022 the season that just started, last week or whenever it was. That's still many billions below the NFL's revenue, okay? And that's just what the NBA is projecting. The Major League Baseball before the pandemic hit was at 9. And it's probably, last year was down, this year will be up. The NFL's up 13, 14, 15, depending on where the TV shakes out. So they're making billions and billions more, by orders of magnitude more. And so, they don't want to derail the train. And the average fan who doesn't care about any of this stuff, who's just a football fan, there's been a bunch of great games and a bunch of exciting young teams. The Buffalo Bills, who would have thought? Josh Allen, he was terrible coming out of college. And somebody at the Buffalo Bills had the foresight to know if we take a couple years and develop him, he's going to turn into what he is today, which is far different from where he was at Wyoming. Patrick Mahomes, bright young star. Can I just say, by the way, his brother's an idiot. I was not very little offends me. You can say almost anything to me, it won't offend me. I was offended, that having been said, by the fact that he was doing a TikTok on Sean Taylor's number. Did you see this?
Yeah, I saw that.
And I blame Washington.
Yeah, it was their fault. Yeah.
Yeah, you told these people to stand on the number. It's just, and yes, that kid, I can't remember his name, the younger Mahomes should have had greater awareness. But on the other hand, the Washington PR staff should have known not to tell him to stand next to or on the number, for Christ's sake.
I have a good idea. We're getting hammered for days on end about this whole Sean Taylor thing that was a bot from beginning to end. Let's build the number space on the opposing sideline where we ask their VIPs to stand.
Why are you putting it on the Kansas City Chiefs side, and then you're going to put the star quarterback's family, tell them to stand on it? It's like literally dancing on a man's grave.
Yeah,
in effect. He's not buried there, but it's basically a grave.
I don't know.
Crazy. By the way, can we just talk about, if you want, so this is a little bit of a business story, I think. So Sean Taylor died in 2007, I believe it was. His death greatly affected the members of the team, the organization, and the fan base, and it still bites today. He has become a hero to this fan base. He means a lot to this fan base. The idea that Jason Wright, and I blame him primarily because he's responsible, even if he didn't cook this up, didn't have the foresight to realize we just can't use this as a distraction and announce this 2 days later, is just business incompetence. Truly, truly, truly. Teams announce these things months ahead of time. And like our writer Dave Earl in his Burgundy and Gold reaction linked to what the Eagles did for Brian Dawkins several years ago. Big, nice ceremony, lights, lasers. They did it in a primetime game. It was nighttime. And it was appropriate for what Brian Dawkins meant to the Philadelphia Eagles. And the idea that Jason Wright just 2 days, ahead of time says, yeah, by the way, we're going to do this. And they have this crappy framed jersey and, they didn't even give him a day by himself. It's a fundamental lack of understanding of what Sean Taylor means to the Redskins franchise. Terrible business decision.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree. Jason Wright is there to protect. He is the most charitable version of his job is he is the last line of defense to protect against this kind of stuff. Right? That's literally why he's there. So if that filter doesn't work, then the filter doesn't work. Right? Like that's his job. And so before doing anything, when they talk about we're going to be a multi-entertainment, blah, 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 before you do any of that, and if you can get the place to do that, Godspeed. Your first job is to do no more harm. And Richmond Times-Dispatch, Washington beat Michael Phillips had the best tweet. He said a couple days ago, I would have had botching Sean Taylor's jersey retirement on the very short list of things they couldn't mess up.
Yeah, that's the point. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what Sean Taylor means to this franchise. And you used it clearly. They deserve no benefit of the doubt, and they clearly used it to distract from the fact that the DEA raided the
that story from 2012, right?
It's like nobody even remembers that the DA raided the team, for Christ's sake, And they raided, they were technically investigating the trainer. Where the hell do you think the trainer was getting all this, all this stuff? It was clearly from the team.
They interviewed 20 people inside the building. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I mean, it's just crazy, and so we're going to use the most beloved player of the past 30 years and the one player who was tragically murdered. We're going to use him as a distraction, and you're going to totally botch the distraction. Yes, it's sort of like Alex said. What Zeus's opinion on the Hawks side was that Jason is dealing with dumpster fires from long ago. I said he's setting a new dumpster on fire.
It's his job not to start new ones, and a new one was started in his watch. And if he felt like he couldn't tell the owner this is a horrible idea, so if you give him the benefit of the doubt that that's what went down, which is probable,
he ought to be able to stand up to Snyder and say,
and if you can't resign because that's your job.
That's exactly right. Like if you guys noticed that there was a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Shaler, I think. He's a Marine Corps officer who's currently being court-martialed. And I'm not trying to get political here, but the point is he made like a Facebook video criticizing the leadership of the Department of Defense for Afghanistan policy. And I'm not here to debate that. Think whatever you want. That's not this show. Point is, what he said is, you guys need to throw your rank in if you disagree. And by making this video, knowingly, he was throwing his rank in. He made a video knowing it was against the law for him to do this in uniform. He did it anyway. He quit in protest. That's what Jason Wright should have done. If Sean Taylor is this important to the Washington franchise, if Dan Snyder is bound and hell-bent on destroying the legacy of the most beloved player of the past 30 years, resign. I think you're right.
Yeah. I mean, anybody with half a pulse could say, I'm not sure if this is going to go over well. I don't think this is going to have the desired effect that you think it's going to have. That's a pretty common sense opinion. And, Jason Wright's an intelligent, smart guy. You get a job in 2 seconds. Walk back in the door at Kinsey. So it's not like, like him taking a stand here would not have been
Might have actually helped him in the long term.
By the way, spending another year with the Washington franchise and that reverse laundromat probably is the quickest way to not get new jobs.
Reverse laundromat is, remember, nobody comes out of this franchise looking good. It destroys reputations and careers always.
Yeah,
always. But here's what you could have done with Sean Taylor: pick a primetime game. I can't remember if the Monday Night Football game is in Washington or not, but pick either a Sunday night game or a Monday night game.
Seattle.
There you go. Yeah, that one's in Washington. Right. Pick the Seattle game, and you announce back in June, this is Sean Taylor Day. You coordinate with the network to make sure they show some of the halftime thing on Monday Night Football. You do the big Brian Dawkins in the lights thing. You invite the family. They have something better than a crappy framed jersey, standing on, the 30-yard line. You could have done it right. and it could have been what should have been done long ago. They shouldn't have waited this long. Should have been done long ago, but that could have been closure for the whole Sean Taylor era. Instead, what'd you do? You ripped off the Band-Aid and caused the scab to bleed again.
They're not even smart enough to know, all right, let's do some kind. It's already alumni weekend. Let's do something, honor a legend. Bring in a typical, and I say this with love in my heart, bring in a typical patsy like Daryl Green. You know, someone that doesn't have the whole, like, tragedy narrative, will do anything for the team. Just say, oh, you were honoring Daryl Green.
Daryl Green Day. Yeah. We're going to retire your jersey number or whatever. Yeah.
You probably still get a little bit blowback, but it's a lot different. So they're not even smart enough to do those kinds of... They can't even make the right cynical choices.
The reason why we're talking about this, the reason why I brought it up is that this is a business... This is business judgment here, okay? It's terrible, awful business judgment. It's a total inability to read the room, which... executives of major corporations always have to do. And it's just an inability. You hear, this is a business term. Reading the room is a business term. And you hear this. And it's just a complete lack of ability to read the room. Totally. Awful.
Completely. It was an embarrassment, but I'm sure in 2 weeks we'll have another one that we'll be able to talk about. But it'll be the FBI raid or something next. Jeez Louise. The funny thing is, so this weekend, which would, when you listen to this will be past, but Washington football team heads into Green Bay to play the Packers on a pretty banal 1:00 typical mid-season type game. At halftime, the Packers will be honoring two players, Greg Jennings, decent wide receiver, not a legendary guy, and some random safety, who I'm sure was a good player for Green Bay. I can't remember his name. They'll do that at halftime. I don't even. It's not even a numbers ceremony. It's just a like, hey, maybe it's a ring of honor. Maybe these guys were good. They announced that a year ago.
And this is not a guy who died. Who's
no,
a hero
it's
and a
Greg
legend
Jennings. You may not have even started Greg Jennings every week on your fantasy team if you had him.
Oh, that's like I said. It's a total lack of ability to read the room at all. You're exactly. It's a good point. You could have brought in whoever, Charlie Taylor, maybe. You know, or Sonny,
Yeah, Sonny or Daryl would do anything, right? If you need a meat shield, use them.
Yeah, exactly right. Because they need to retire Sonny Jurgensen's jersey.
And Daryl Green.
There's several other jerseys. Daryl Green's one, Rigo, they need to do him. There's several others they could have brought in that's not Sean Taylor, for God's sakes.
Totally. All right, so I think we're wound out here, Steve. So give us a prediction. What part of the story, and there's many parts, do you think we'll still be talking about in 2 weeks? And maybe none is an appropriate answer.
No, I think we will, because there's going to be a congressional hearing of some type. And so we're going to hear more about the inner workings of the treatment of women in the Washington facility, because that's what the congressman people, I think one's a man, one's a woman. So Congress people want to grandstand about is that. And so I don't necessarily think we're going to see more emails, but I think we're going to hear more from these women. Somebody's going to interview these cheerleaders and whatnot, or whoever they are, the reporters, so I think we'll hear more about that for another few weeks.
I'll go a slightly different direction, although, I think all of these things could happen, and we could all be right. I think that there's some part of the leaker, or one of the leaker, who is, it's almost like, when you're in the hospital and your IV medicine is on a timer, so it doles out over time. You get the same amount of morphine 2 days later as you got when they hooked you up. I think there's a planned strategic drop of cash of these emails towards something bigger. So I do think we'll get a coordinated little, it won't be a bunch of, silver bullets, but we'll get like another chum for the water bunch of emails in the next couple weeks.
Do you think it's going to, because like the John Gruden stuff was just John Gruden saying idiotic things.
Yeah, and he's a huge star.
Yeah, do you think we're leading up to like the granddaddy of them all, something awful, or is it just drip, 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 drip?
No,
drip?
I think the next one will be drip, drip. It'll be more Bruce Allen, Jeff Pash than Bruce Allen, John Gruden.
Yeah. True, we'll see.
Yeah, we will see.
Either way, we'll be talking about this on this show some more.
Yeah, there's the safe bet. No, none of us we won't talk about it at all. We'll be back to some random
thank you.
sneaker deal.
Hashtag content.
All right, Steve. So I know we might be hitting it's kind of a slog section of a bad Washington football team season, but what's going on in the Hog side?
Yeah, I mean, this is the period of time. If they get pasted by the Packers and the Broncos, yeah, it's over. We're in the slog time. But we are right in the middle of the heart of it. So we have our game preview show come out on Thursday. We have our game recap show come out on Monday with all kinds of written content. Dave Earl's Burgundy and Gold Reaction. Jamal Forrest does weekly analysis of the comments coming out of the park. And we have a lot more Rick Snyder's Seasons to Discontent, which is 2 shows a week, normally Tuesday and Thursday. So stay tuned for all of that.
All right, we will see you in 2 weeks.